Some people don't realize who they're humiliating until the helicopters arrive. Rain hammered the windows of St. Matthew's Medical Center while the Friday night ER overflowed with noise, stretcher wheels, exhausted nurses, worried families, the sharp beeping of monitors somewhere down the hall. Claire Whitmore stood beside bed 14 with blood pressure numbers flickering across a screen, her navy scrub sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows. A gray-haired veteran lay unconscious beneath a thin hospital blanket, his breathing shallow, an old Marine Corps tattoo fading across his wrist. "He needs immediate imaging," Claire said calmly. "His abdomen is rigid. Something's wrong internally." Dr. Richard Hale barely glanced at the patient before signing another clipboard. "The man doesn't have insurance." Claire's jaw tightened slightly. Nothing else moved. "He served this country for 22 years, she replied. Hale finally looked up, irritation flashing across his face. The surrounding nurses instantly went silent. Everyone in the ER knew that expression. "You are not authorized to challenge administrative decisions," Hale said coldly. "I'm authorizing treatment," Claire answered. Her voice never rose. That somehow made the tension worse. Hale stepped closer, lowering his voice enough for nearby staff to lean in anyway. "You've become emotionally compromised." Again. Claire stared at him without blinking. Rainwater rolled down the glass behind her while ambulance lights painted the hallway red and blue. "If we wait another 30 minutes, she said quietly, "that man could crash." Hale exhaled through his nose like he was tired of her existence. "Turn in your badge." The words landed harder than shouting. A nurse near the medication station looked away immediately. Another froze mid-chart. Claire slowly unclipped her hospital ID from her scrub pocket. No argument. No anger. Just silence. Hale folded his arms. "Security can escort you out after your shift notes are transferred." Claire placed the badge into his hand. Her fingers were steady. Hale seemed almost annoyed by that. "You think rules don't apply to you," he muttered. Claire glanced once toward the veteran. On bed 14. The old man's pulse monitor skipped irregularly for half a second. Her eyes caught it instantly. "His pressure's dropping," she said. Hale didn't even turn around. "That's not your concern anymore." Something changed in the room then. Tiny. Almost invisible. Claire's posture straightened slightly, shoulders settling back with unconscious precision. One of the younger nurses noticed faint white scars near her wrist as Claire adjusted her gloves. Another noticed the way she scanned exits automatically every few seconds, calm eyes mapping the entire ER without effort. It didn't feel like normal awareness. It felt trained. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city. Then bed 14 suddenly alarmed. The veteran's breathing became uneven. Several nurses rushed forward at once, uncertain, overlapping each other with nervous voices. Claire moved before anyone else did. Fast. Controlled. Efficient. "Raise the head 30 degrees, she ordered softly. "Get oxygen on him now." A resident blinked at her. "But, you were fired." Claire reached for the oxygen mask anyway. "Then stop wasting time." The resident hesitated for 1 second too long. Claire already had the oxygen line connected before anyone else moved. "Slow breaths, sir. Stay with me." Her voice remained low, controlled, almost strangely calm compared to the chaos building around her. The veteran's chest rose unevenly beneath the blanket while rain rattled against the emergency room windows. Somewhere near the entrance, paramedics rolled in another patient dripping water across the floor tiles, but nobody in the trauma bay looked away from Claire anymore. Dr. Hale turned sharply. "I told you to stop." Claire never looked at him. "His skin temperature is dropping." She checked the monitor again. "Pressure is 80/50. One of the younger nurses frowned. "How did you catch that so fast?" Claire adjusted the oxygen mask with precise movements. Because he is compensating. The nurse blinked twice like she had missed part of the conversation. Most civilian trauma staff did not use that wording naturally. Claire did. Hale stepped closer, frustration hardening his expression. You are no longer employed here. Then call someone else, Claire answered quietly. Fast. Bed 14 alarmed again. This time louder. The veteran suddenly grabbed weakly at Claire's wrist, confusion clouding his eyes. Corpseman, he whispered. Claire froze for the smallest fraction of a second. Just enough for the nurse beside her to notice. You were military? The nurse asked softly. Claire gently lowered the man's hand back onto the blanket. Long time ago. Her answer ended there. No details. No explanation. Hale folded his arms tighter across his expensive suit jacket. This is exactly the problem. You blur professional boundaries. Claire finally looked at him directly. There was no anger in her face. Somehow that made him more uncomfortable. No, she said. The problem is that everyone in this room knows he needs treatment. Silence spread through the ER again. Heavy. Sharp. Unavoidable. Even the front desk receptionist stopped typing. Hale opened his mouth to respond when a deep vibration suddenly rolled through the ceiling above them. At first it sounded distant, almost like thunder trapped inside the storm clouds. Then the fluorescent lights trembled slightly. A few people glanced upward. The vibration came again. Stronger this time. Rotor blades. Claire's eyes shifted toward the ceiling instantly. Pure instinct. One of the paramedics frowned. Is that a news helicopter? Another low thunder passed overhead. Closer now. Much closer. Outside, rain whipped sideways across the parking structure as dark shadows moved above the hospital roofline. Hale looked irritated more than concerned. Probably trauma transport from County General. But Claire already knew better. Something subtle changed in her expression. Not fear. Recognition. A security guard near the ambulance doors suddenly pressed a hand to his earpiece. Dr. Hale. His voice cracked slightly. There are military vehicles pulling into the front entrance. Hale stared at him. What? Before the guard could answer, every monitor in the ER flickered briefly from the vibration overhead. Then came the sound that made the entire floor stop moving. Heavy landing gear touching concrete directly above them. The helicopter had landed on the roof. For 3 long seconds, nobody in the emergency room moved. The sound above them vibrated through the walls, through the ceiling tiles, through the stainless steel supply carts lined beside the trauma bays. Rain continued hammering the rooftop while the helicopter engines slowly powered down overhead. Claire removed her gloves with calm, deliberate movements. Everyone else looked terrified or confused. She looked like she had heard that sound 1,000 times before. Dr. Hale stared toward the ceiling, irritation fading into uncertainty. Why would military aircraft land here? Nobody answered him. The security guard near the entrance swallowed hard as another radio call crackled through his earpiece. Sir, he said carefully, there are armed personnel entering the building. A nervous laugh escaped one of the reception nurses. Armed? The guard nodded once. Navy uniforms. The entire room shifted emotionally in an instant. Families waiting near the hallway stood up from their chairs. A child pointed toward the elevators. 2 paramedics exchanged uneasy glances. Even the veteran on bed 14 opened his eyes slightly at the word Navy. Claire remained still beside him. One of the younger residents looked at her. Did you know they were coming? No, Claire answered honestly. But something in her voice suggested she already understood exactly what this meant. The elevator doors at the far end of the ER opened sharply. Three figures stepped out wearing dark navy rain jackets soaked from the storm outside. Their boots echoed against the polished hospital floor with controlled precision. Not rushed. Not uncertain. Purposeful. Every conversation inside the emergency room died immediately. The tallest officer scanned the room once with cold professional focus. Mid-40s. Broad shoulders. Commander insignia visible beneath the rainwater on his collar. Beside him walked two younger tactical medics carrying black equipment cases. Dr. Hale straightened his tie automatically, forcing confidence back into his posture as he walked forward. "I am Director Hale," he announced. "This area is restricted. What exactly is going on here?" The commander barely acknowledged him. "We are looking for Lieutenant Claire Whitmore." Silence. Complete silence. One nurse slowly turned toward Claire. Then another. Hale blinked once. "Lieutenant?" The commander's eyes moved through the room until they landed on Claire standing quietly beside bed 14. For the first time since entering the hospital, his expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Respect. He walked directly toward her while the tactical medics remained behind. Claire met his gaze calmly. "Commander Brooks," she said softly. Hale looked between them in confusion. "You know each other?" Brooks stopped 3 feet from Claire. Rainwater still dripped from the edge of his jacket onto the hospital floor. "Lieutenant Whitmore," he said formally, "I apologize for the delay." Several people in the ER stared openly now. The resident who questioned Claire earlier looked completely lost. "Wait," he whispered, "she was actually Navy?" Claire gave the smallest nod without taking her eyes off Brooks. Hale forced a short laugh, trying to regain control of the room. "There must be some misunderstanding here. Claire is a civilian nurse." Brooks finally looked at him directly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. "No, doctor," he replied. "Lieutenant Whitmore served as senior combat trauma specialist attached to Naval Special Warfare." Hale's face drained of color. Behind him, one of the nurses covered her mouth in disbelief. Claire said nothing. She simply stood there while the entire emergency room slowly realized the woman they had watched get fired minutes earlier was someone the United States Navy had just crossed a storm to find. Dr. Hale opened his mouth twice before any words finally came out. "There has to be some mistake." Commander Brooks did not even glance in his direction this time. His attention remained fixed on Claire with the kind of focus that only existed between people who had survived difficult places together. "We lost communication with transport 15 minutes ago," he said quietly. "Captain Mercer is deteriorating faster than expected." Claire's expression tightened slightly at the name. Very few people noticed it. Brooks did. "Who is Captain Mercer?" one of the residents whispered nearby. Another nurse answered under her breath. "I do not think we are supposed to ask." Rainwater continued dripping from the Navy officers' jackets onto the polished floor while tension spread across the emergency room like static electricity. Hale tried forcing authority back into his voice. "This hospital has experienced trauma surgeons available. If your patient requires emergency intervention, we can assign someone qualified." Brooks finally turned toward him completely. Calm. Controlled. Dangerous in a way that never needed volume. "With respect, Dr. Hale, we specifically came for Lieutenant Whitmore." The sentence hit harder than anyone expected. Claire lowered her eyes briefly, almost tired. "Brooks," she said softly, "I am not active duty anymore." "No," he replied. "But you are still the best field trauma specialist I have ever worked with." Several people in the ER exchanged stunned looks. One nurse slowly sat down without realizing she had done it. Hale stared at Claire as though seeing a completely different person standing in front of him now. "You never mentioned any of this during your hiring process." Claire looked back at him evenly. "You never asked." Somewhere behind them, the veteran on bed 14 gave a weak laugh beneath the oxygen mask. "Knew it," he muttered faintly. "You got military eyes." Claire glanced over immediately to check his monitor before speaking again. His pressure stabilized for now. Even now, after everything happening around her, she was still tracking the patient first. Brooks noticed that too. His expression softened for the first time since arriving. "You have not changed." Claire gave the faintest hint of a smile. "Neither have helicopters apparently." A few nervous laughs escaped from nearby staff. The tension broke for half a second before one of the tactical medics stepped forward quickly. "Commander." His voice lowered. "Captain Mercer is losing responsiveness." Brooks nodded once. "Bring him in." The ER doors near the ambulance bay swung open immediately afterward. Rain blasted briefly through the entrance as a rolling trauma stretcher came. Inside, surrounded by two Navy medics. The patient was covered beneath thermal blankets connected to portable monitoring equipment. Several hospital staff instinctively stepped aside at the sight of the military transport setup alone. Hale moved forward automatically. "Get him into trauma too." One of his surgeons hurried over with a tablet in hand. "What injuries are we dealing with?" The Navy medic answered without slowing down. "Rapid internal complications following airborne decompression stress." The surgeon frowned. "That should not be fatal." Claire's eyes narrowed instantly. Unless he already had previous chest trauma. Every Navy medic in the room looked at her at once. Brooks slowly nodded. 3 deployments ago, he confirmed. Collapsed lung during extraction. The surgeon looked confused. Claire already moved toward the stretcher before anyone else reacted. Her pace never quickened. No panic. No hesitation. Just certainty. As the stretcher rolled past her, Captain Mercer's hand shifted weakly beneath the blanket. Claire froze for one brief moment after seeing the faded black wristband tied near his sleeve. Old unit identification. Old memories. Brooks saw recognition flash across her face immediately. "He asked for you by name," he said quietly. The room went completely silent again when Claire finally whispered back, "I thought Mercer retired years ago." Claire followed the stretcher into trauma too while the rest of the emergency room watched in complete silence. Nobody tried stopping her anymore. Not even Dr. Hale. The overhead lights reflected softly across stainless steel equipment while rain continued beating against the hospital windows. Captain Mercer looked older than she remembered. Gray streaks touched the edges of his beard now. Deep lines marked the corners of his eyes. Time had moved forward for both of them, yet the second Claire saw the faded black wristband near his sleeve, old memories returned instantly. Desert heat. Rotor noise. Sand striking metal in the middle of the night. "Lieutenant," one of the Navy medics asked carefully. Claire blinked once, returning to the present. "Get me his latest vitals." Her voice changed slightly. Inside the trauma room. Sharper. More precise. Not louder. Just impossible to ignore. The medic handed her a tablet immediately. No hesitation. Hale noticed that. So did every hospital employee standing near the doorway pretending not to stare. Claire studied the numbers while Mercer struggled weakly to open his eyes. "Pulse unstable," she murmured. "Breathing pattern is compensating again." The young resident beside Hale whispered, "That is the second time she has said that." Hale ignored him completely. Brooks stepped beside Claire. "We diverted here because he asked for you specifically after he regained consciousness during transport." Claire kept reading the chart. "He should have gone to Bethesda. Storm blocked the route." Brooks paused briefly before adding, "You were closer." Claire finally looked up at him. Something emotional flickered beneath her calm expression for the first time all night. "I left 7 years ago." Brooks nodded slowly. "Some people never really leave." Mercer shifted weakly on the stretcher, then managed to speak through uneven breaths. "Still giving orders, Whitmore?" Claire stepped closer immediately. "Still refusing retirement, Captain?" A faint smile touched Mercer's face before exhaustion pulled it away again. One of the younger nurses standing near the supply cabinet whispered to another, "How does a civilian nurse know Navy captains personally?" The second nurse shook her head slowly. "I do not think she was ever just a civilian nurse." Claire examined Mercer carefully, her eyes tracking details faster than anyone else in the room could process. She checked his breathing rhythm, skin tone, pressure readings, old surgical scarring near his collarbone. Then she suddenly reached for the thermal blanket. "Raise room temperature 4 degrees, she said. "Warm intravenous fluids now." The resident frowned. "Why?" Claire answered without looking at him. "His body is preparing for shock." Brooks crossed his arms quietly. "That instinct of yours used to scare pilots." Claire ignored the comment, though one of the medics smiled faintly at the memory. Hale stepped into the trauma room carefully now, trying to recover some authority. "Lieutenant Whitmore," he began awkwardly, still uncomfortable saying the title out loud, "exactly what unit were you attached to?" The room grew quieter somehow. Claire continued adjusting Mercer's oxygen line before finally answering. "Medical extraction." Hale waited for more. She gave none. Brooks looked toward him instead. "Restricted operations," he explained calmly. "High-risk recoveries." Hale swallowed. "Combat zones?" Claire finally met his eyes again. "Places people usually needed helicopters to leave." The answer settled heavily into the room. Nobody spoke for several seconds afterward. Outside the trauma bay windows, lightning flashed white across the storm cloud surrounding the city skyline. Mercer weakly turned his head toward Claire again. "Thought you were done saving idiots like me." Claire adjusted the blanket near his shoulder with steady hands. "I was," she said softly. Then tonight happened. The storm outside grew louder as Trauma 2 filled with quiet urgency. Nurses moved faster now, though every few seconds someone still glanced toward Claire like they were trying to reconcile the woman they worked beside every week with the officer standing calmly in front of them now. Dr. Hale remained near the doorway, strangely unsure where to place himself anymore. That uncertainty alone changed the atmosphere of the entire room. Claire studied Captain Mercer's chart again while monitors pulsed softly beside the stretcher. Something about the numbers bothered her. Not panic. Instinct. The kind built from years of noticing tiny details before disasters arrived. "How long was he in transport?" she asked without looking up. One of the Navy medics checked his watch automatically. "Approximately 90 minutes from initial pickup." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Too long." Brooks immediately understood her concern. The weather forced rerouting. Claire gently pressed 2 fingers near Mercer's collarbone, checking tissue tension beneath the skin. "He was stable before flight." "Yes." Then something changed in the air. Hale stepped forward carefully. "You think altitude triggered complications?" Claire nodded once. "Old scar tissue. Pressure stress. His lungs are struggling to compensate." The resident beside Hale looked stunned. "How are you diagnosing that without imaging?" Claire finally glanced toward him. "Because I have seen it before." Her voice stayed calm, but for the first time there was exhaustion underneath it. The kind that came from memories nobody else in the room shared. Mercer shifted weakly again. "You always hated helicopters," he murmured through uneven breathing. Claire gave a faint breath of amusement. "No. I hated crashing in them." A few people exchanged nervous looks, uncertain whether she was joking. Brooks knew she was not. He leaned quietly against the wall beside the trauma monitors. "Kandahar," he said softly. Claire's expression changed immediately. Not fear. Not pain exactly either. Just distance. Like part of her mind suddenly stood somewhere thousands of miles away. Rain tapped steadily against the windows while the emergency room outside seemed to fade into background noise. That mission was classified, she replied. Brooks nodded slowly. Most of it still is. The resident looked between them. Mission? Hale shot him a warning look to stay quiet, but curiosity had already spread through the room. Claire adjusted Mercer's intravenous line before speaking again. Dust storm hit during extraction, she said quietly. Pilot lost visibility at 800 feet. Nobody interrupted her now. Even the monitors seemed quieter somehow. We lost hydraulic control during descent, Brooks continued carefully. Aircraft went down hard outside the valley perimeter. One of the nurses covered her mouth slightly. Were there casualties? Claire stared at the floor for half a second before answering. Enough. Silence settled over the room again. Heavy this time. Personal. Mercer slowly opened his eyes a little wider. She carried 2 men out before support arrived, he whispered weakly. Stayed awake for 19 straight hours treating everyone. Claire immediately shook her head. Mercer. But he ignored her. You know what command called her after that? Nobody spoke. Mercer smiled faintly despite the exhaustion pulling at him. Ghost medic. Claire looked genuinely uncomfortable. Hearing the words out loud. Brooks folded his arms quietly. Half the squad survived because she refused to quit. Hale stared at Claire like the floor beneath him no longer felt stable. The nurse he fired less than an hour ago suddenly felt impossible to understand. Claire checked Mercer's pulse again, deliberately redirecting attention away from herself. Save your energy, she told him softly. Mercer looked at her for another moment before whispering, still doing that thing. What thing? Claire adjusted the blanket near his shoulder. Acting like saving people is normal. The monitors beside Captain Mercer suddenly changed rhythm. Fast. Uneven. One sharp alarm cut through the room hard enough to make several nurses jump. Claire reacted instantly. His oxygen saturation is dropping. The resident stepped closer to the screen. How is that possible? Claire already knew. She pulled the scan images onto the nearby monitor while rain flashed silver across the windows behind her. There, she said quietly, pointing toward the upper chest area. Pressure buildup. The resident squinted. I still do not see it. Claire exhaled slowly, forcing patience. Because you are looking for textbook damage. This is old scar tissue collapsing under stress. Brooks watched her carefully from across the room. The same focus. The same composure. 7 years had passed, yet she still moved exactly like she did during deployments. Mercer tried taking a deeper breath, but discomfort crossed his face immediately. Claire leaned down slightly beside him. Stay with me, Captain. Mercer gave the faintest smile. You always say that. Because you never listen. Despite the tension, one of the Navy medics quietly laughed under his breath. Dr. Hale stood near the doorway, completely silent now. The authority he carried earlier in the night felt distant, almost embarrassing compared to what he was witnessing. Claire studied the monitor another second before making a decision. We need decompression equipment prepared now. The resident looked startled. Immediately. Claire turned toward him calmly. If we wait, his lungs will continue destabilizing. Hale finally stepped forward. Should we transfer him to surgery? Claire shook her head once. He will not make it through another transport upstairs in this condition. Her certainty froze everyone again. Not arrogance. Experience. The kind earned the hard way. Claire reached for a pair of gloves while giving instructions with smooth precision. Warm saline ready. Portable ultrasound beside the bed. Keep room noise down. Nobody questioned her anymore. The entire trauma team simply moved. Brooks noticed that too. Funny thing about leadership, he said quietly to Hale. The right person never has to ask twice. Hale looked away, unable to answer. Claire focused entirely on Mercer now. The world outside the trauma room disappeared for her the same way it always had during emergencies. Noise faded. Fear faded. Every movement became efficient, measured, controlled. One nurse handed her equipment with nervous hands. Claire immediately steadied her gently. "Breathe," she said softly. "You are doing fine." The nurse nodded, visibly calmer afterward. Mercer watched Claire through tired eyes while the room moved around them. "Still carrying everyone," he whispered. Claire adjusted the monitor cable near his shoulder. "Somebody carried me once too." Brooks lowered his eyes briefly after hearing that. Another silence settled over the room, but this one felt different. Respectful. The resident glanced between the Navy officers before finally asking the question everyone else had been afraid to say out loud. "How many lives has she actually saved?" Brooks looked toward Claire for a moment before answering quietly. "Enough that some people are still alive because she refused to leave them behind." Hale swallowed hard. His gaze drifted toward the hospital badge still sitting forgotten in his jacket pocket. The same badge he forced her to surrender less than an hour ago. Claire never noticed. Or maybe she did not care anymore. Another monitor alarm sounded suddenly. Mercer's breathing shifted again. Claire's eyes sharpened immediately. "Everyone clear the left side." The room obeyed instantly. No hesitation. No confusion. Just movement. Brooks watched the entire trauma team fall into rhythm around her. And quietly shook his head with almost invisible admiration. "There she is," he murmured softly. "The ghost medic." The room moved exactly the way Claire wanted now. Quiet. Focused. Efficient. Nurses adjusted equipment before she even finished speaking. The resident who questioned her earlier stood beside the monitor watching carefully, trying to understand how one person could control an entire trauma room without ever raising her voice. Captain Mercer's breathing remained uneven, but the panic inside the room had disappeared. Claire removed one glove, checked his pulse again, then nodded slightly to herself. "Pressure is stabilizing." A collective breath released across trauma 2. One of the younger nurses smiled with visible relief. "He is responding." Claire replaced the glove calmly. "He is fighting." Brooks leaned against the wall with folded arms, exhaustion finally visible in his face now that Mercer's condition had slowed from critical to manageable. "That is what he has always done." Mercer managed the faintest grin. "You make me sound dramatic." Claire adjusted the intravenous flow without looking at him. "You flew through a thunderstorm in a military helicopter with collapsed scar tissue." Mercer breathed carefully before answering. "Fair point." Quiet laughter moved through the room again. Even Dr. Hale looked less rigid now, though embarrassment still lingered heavily across his expression. He watched Claire speaking softly to nurses, monitoring equipment, reassuring Mercer, guiding younger staff without ego or anger. Nothing about her behavior suggested someone seeking recognition. That made the realization worse somehow. Hale slowly reached into his suit pocket and looked down at the hospital identification badge he forced her to surrender earlier that night. Claire Whitmore. Emergency Department Nurse. The title suddenly felt absurdly incomplete. The resident beside him lowered his voice. "You fired her." Hale did not answer immediately. Across the room, one of the Navy medics carefully removed a waterproof case from his gear bag while reorganizing equipment. The case slipped briefly from his hands onto the counter with a dull metallic sound. It opened slightly on impact. Several small items slid partly into view before the medic quickly reached for them. One object caught Hale's attention immediately. A faded military patch. Dark blue background. Silver insignia stitched into worn fabric. Beneath it sat a bronze star ribbon inside protective plastic. The medic noticed Hale staring. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the medic quietly closed the case again. Lieutenant Whitmore earned those years ago. Hale looked toward Claire instinctively. She was helping reposition Mercer's oxygen tubing, completely unaware of the conversation happening behind her. She never mentioned decorations, Hale murmured. The medic gave a faint smile. People like her usually do not. Brooks overheard the exchange and looked toward Claire with tired respect. Half the unit tried convincing her to accept a command role after Kandahar. Hale blinked. She refused promotion. Twice. The answer landed heavily. Hale glanced around the trauma room again. The nurses trusted her instinctively now. The residents listened the second she spoke. Even military personnel deferred to her judgment without hesitation. Yet she had spent years quietly working overnight emergency shifts in a civilian hospital while most people saw her as ordinary. Claire finally noticed the silence around her and looked up slightly. Why is everyone staring? Nobody answered immediately. Mercer gave the faintest smile beneath the oxygen mask. Because your secret is terrible. Claire sighed softly, almost embarrassed. I was hoping for one normal year. Brooks laughed under his breath for the first time all night. That was never going to happen. Outside the storm slowly began fading beyond the hospital windows. The thunder grew more distant now. Inside Trauma 2, the atmosphere had changed completely. Fear was gone. Confusion was gone. What remained was something quieter. Respect. Not forced. Earned. An hour later, the emergency room finally sounded normal again. The sharp alarms had faded. Rain slowed to a soft tapping against the hospital windows. Captain Mercer rested quietly inside recovery while Navy medics completed paperwork near the hallway. For the first time all night, people inside St. Matthew's Medical Center had time to breathe. Claire stood alone near the coffee station holding a paper cup that had already gone cold in her hands. She looked exhausted now that the crisis had passed. Not physically. Emotionally. Like carrying old memories had become heavier than lifting patients ever was. Brooks approached slowly beside her. Mercer is stable. Claire nodded once. Good. He is asking if you still owe him $20 from Bahrain. A faint smile touched her face. Tell him inflation erased the debt. Brooks laughed quietly before his expression softened again. You know they are going to talk about tonight for years. Claire stared through the dark windows toward the rooftop lights above the hospital. That is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Across the hallway, nurses continued glancing toward her with quiet admiration. The younger resident looked like he still could not fully process what he had witnessed. Even the veteran from bed 14 had stabilized after receiving treatment Claire fought for earlier that night. Dr. Hale slowly approached from the far side of the corridor holding her hospital identification badge carefully between both hands. His expensive shoes echoed softly against the polished floor. Claire noticed him immediately but said nothing. Hale stopped in front of her for several seconds before finally speaking. I was wrong. The sentence sounded difficult for him. Honest too. Claire looked at the badge in his hands but made no move to take it back. About the patient, she asked quietly. Hale lowered his eyes. About you. Silence settled between them while distant thunder faded beyond the city skyline. Hale swallowed hard before continuing. I spent years believing leadership meant authority. His voice tightened slightly. Tonight I watched an entire room trust you without hesitation. I have never seen anything like that. Claire remained calm. No triumph. No satisfaction. Hale held the badge out toward her. St. Matthew's would be fortunate to keep someone like you. Claire stared at the plastic card for a long moment. Then she gently pushed his hand back toward him. Hale looked confused. You are not coming back. Claire glanced toward the recovery wing where Mercer rested. Some chapters are not meant to reopen. Brooks watched quietly from the hallway without interrupting. Hale looked genuinely regretful now. I should have listened when you fought for that veteran. Claire finally met his eyes directly. People do not stop deserving care because life becomes inconvenient. Hale nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Somewhere above them, helicopter blades began turning again on the rooftop. Low. Heavy. Familiar. Claire closed her eyes briefly after hearing the sound. Not fear. Not excitement. Just recognition. Brooks stepped closer. Weather window is opening. We should move. Claire set the untouched coffee cup onto the counter. One of the nurses near the desk suddenly spoke up. Lieutenant Whitmore. Claire turned slightly. The young nurse smiled nervously. Thank you, for tonight. Others nearby quietly nodded in agreement. Claire looked almost uncomfortable receiving the attention. Take care of bed 14 for me, she said softly. He likes terrible coffee, old war movies, and pretending he is tougher than he actually is. Laughter moved gently through the hallway. Then Claire picked up her old canvas bag and walked toward the elevators beside Brooks. Nobody tried stopping her. The entire emergency room watched in silence as the woman they once saw as just another nurse disappeared toward the rooftop under the sound of waiting helicopter blades. Some people wear uniforms on the outside. Others carry them somewhere deeper where no one can see.